Thus spoke one of the most sincere Republicans. Many reasonable people thought, like Lecointe and Cavani, it was only in a time of calm, they said, that a good citizen could weaken the government. The periodical papers ought to be considered not as books, but like their preachings in the streets, their dependence cannot prejudice the propagation of the true public opinion, of which the representatives of the people are only the authorized organs, for never had any person thought of submitting to the censure the account exactly rendered of all the speeches pronounced at the legislative tribunes. Those speeches were not subject to the censure. The dependence of the papers puts limits only to the political preachings of individuals not authorized by the people and who might be neither citizens nor Frenchmen, for nothing could prevent a foreign minister from creating and sustaining 100 newspapers which might preach in every public place the overthrow of our laws, and which could not be punished until after it had done an evil, which would be reproduced the next day. The tardy chastisement of the incendiary would not have prevented the fire. All these reasons could not stop us. We replied that the newspapers did not express an erroneous public opinion except in those melancholy times of censure, where the press repeats only under 1,000 different forms the lesson of the minister. A liberal paper not paid, not being able to sustain itself but by the adhesion of a great number of subscribers, represents the true opinion of a great number of citizens, and the reunion of all the collective opinions. If it is not the public opinion, it is at least that which approaches the nearest after the universal voting. As for the chastisement after the blow, it will not prevent the evil from having produced its effect. I replied that the efficacy of the penalties that we proposed must assure all the world that our project of law was almost equivalent to the censure and put an end to the abuses, or to calm the alarms of the citizens. It was right to give them the means of expressing their thoughts, that the opinion of the national tribunes was not sufficient for a free people, since even the conduct and the discourse of the deputies was submitted to the judgment not only of their constituents, but to that of every Frenchman, whether they were electors or not. These answers were not without force in theory. The previous censure excluded all political liberty, and when one is reduced to have recourse to that fatal weapon, we must be very near to a state of siege, and imminent peril can alone justify those two measures. But theory apart, on which side was the plain dealing in our discussion? Will it be thoughts that our repressive laws substituted for the censure satisfied the dictatorial authority? Can we suppose that the penalties proposed in our project were sufficient? No, certainly not. We felt, on the contrary, that our law would be illusory, and that was the reason it suited us. We wished to break the executive power, which was losing the republic, and it was necessary for us to disarm a power which was our enemy, and that we had condemned. The passion of the moment overbalanced in our minds the reasons of our adversaries, and the Directory was deprived in those critical days of the preventative inspection of the papers. That example proves that an absolute opinion must sometimes give way in practice to a relative opinion. I say must give way because I voted then as I should vote now under the same circumstances. We acted like good citizens in destroying the government that destroyed us. But if that government had been good, our conduct would have been that of enemies of the people. These details may perhaps not be useless in aiding to judge public men in the time of a revolutionary crisis. He who has navigated in the storm is better able to judge how to guide the vessel during those hours when life is at stake. The measures, therefore, taken in France after the affair of the horrible infernal machine, except the attack against the jury, which nothing can excuse. The law which, without reestablishing the censure, pronounced against the license of the periodical papers exceeding great penalties of repression, appeared to me to be wise, suitable, and patriotic, and completely justified by the events. The censure being out of the question, The penalties should be sufficiently strong, not to be illusory. They would have taken, under the same circumstances, measures at least equally as severe in a republic. The task of governments is not so easy in these days that they should be judged without a little indulgence, if they do not wish to overturn it. The law of the censure abolished, they proceeded without interruption to the discussion of the project of repression that we had presented. We desired a prompt decision. Our ulterior projects were known to above 100 members of the two councils. It might have been revealed by the slightest indiscretion, and the Directory disposed of numerous troops. We pressed, therefore, for the voting of the new law of the unforeseen incident arrived to retard its adoption. Carrera, deputy of the Rhone, proposed in the course of the debate several measures which might have made us lose time. He demanded the formation of a Republican jury of censure, the diminution of the stamp duty upon the newspapers, the prohibition of anonymous writings. Fortunately, that orator, in signalizing the indolence of public opinion, had exaggerated even to the point of affirming that the murders of Verstadt had excited only a very feeble indignation. I profited upon the sitting of the 23rd Prairial by the discontent which the assertion had raised in the chamber to see only that in the discourse of Carrera, which would repulse entirely all his propositions, I spoke as follows. I have just heard a sentence from the last speaker which every one of us is ready to deny. It has exceeded in this assembly an agitation which still continues, where then has been found that the assassinations at Verstadt have excited only a feeble indignation in France. That assertion is injurious. It is false. A unanimous cry of yes, yes. What then have you not heard? The cries of vengeance resound again from one end of the republic to the other, and which are become the song of departure of our youthful defenders. Do you not perceive on every side the striking marks of zeal that popular indignation has excited? Recall then the generous accents of that immense crowd which covered the Champ de Mars and shed tears upon the tombs of our ministers. What sentiments did you read in their countenances? What oaths have you heard? France indifferent to the crime of Verstadt? Already our armies, electrified by that fatal news, have spread terror amid the ranks of our enemies. From the bottom of the Helvetian valleys to the summit of the Apennines, one single cry has been heard. The shades of the victims started. The murderers trembled. That terrible cry, so often repeated in this assembly throughout every part of the republic, must again answer for us here. Vengeance! Vengeance! Vengeance upon the assassins!